السابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين اتبعوهم بإحسان.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. So we're continuing with the book الركائز العشر للتحصيل العلمي, the 10 foundations for the acquisition of knowledge, and we have now reached the 4th one. And so in the 4th one, Shaykh Abdullah ibn Salfiq al-Dhafiri, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, the author, mentions in it رابعا صلاح القلب، فالقلب وعاء العلم، فإن كان الوعاء صالحا خزن ما فيه وحفظه، وإن كان الوعاء فاسدا ضيع ما فيه. والرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم جعل القلب أساس كل شيء، فقال: ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله، وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله، ألا وهي القلب. وصلاح القلب يكون بمعرفة الله تعالى بأسمائه وصفاته وأفعاله، والتفكر في مخلوقاته وآياته، ويكون بتدبر القرآن العظيم، ويكون كذلك بكثرة السجود وقيام الليل، ويتجنب مفسدات القلب وأمراضه، فإنها إن وجدت في القلب فإنه لا يستطيع حمل العلم، وإن حمله لا يفقه، كما قال الله تعالى عن المنافقين مرضى القلوب: لهم قلوب لا يفقهون بها. وأمراض القلوب نوعان: شهوات وشبهات. فالشهوات كحب الدنيا وملذاتها والانشغال بها، وحب الصور المحرمة وسماع المحرمات من الأصوات والمزامير والغناء، وكذلك النظر المحرم. والشبهات كالاعتقادات الفاسدة والأعمال المبتدعة، والانتماء للاتجاهات الفكرية البدعية المخالفة لمسلك السلف الصالح. ومن أمراض القلوب الصادة عن العلم أيضا الحسد والغل والكبر. ومن مفسدات القلب أيضا فضول النوم وفضول الكلام وفضول الطعام، فتجنب هذه الأمراض والمفسدات صلاح للقلب. In this 4th section of the book, the Shaykh, he talks about Salahul Qalb, the righteousness of the heart. And remember, all of this, we are talking about the student of knowledge and his seeking of knowledge, the foundations that are required, the main points that every student needs to focus on if he genuinely and sincerely hopes to gain knowledge of this religion. The fourth point in that is having righteousness in your heart. Having righteousness in your heart, that your heart is pure and sincere and righteous, and that is because the Shaykh says the heart is the vessel that contains the knowledge. Your heart is the container that contains within it the knowledge. And so if that vessel, that container is sound and good and appropriate, it will then store whatever you put into it, and it will preserve it. But if the vessel, the container, the heart is corrupt, then it will lose and waste what you put into it. It will not memorize and safeguard and preserve that knowledge that you put into it if you are a person with a corrupt heart. And the Prophet ﷺ made the heart the foundation for everything. And so he said, indeed in the body there is a morsel of flesh. If it is upon goodness, then the whole body is upon goodness. And if it is corrupted, then the whole body is corrupted. Indeed, it is the heart. That is the level of importance the Prophet ﷺ attached to our hearts, telling us that this organ in your body, if it becomes corrupt, if there are diseases within it, then the rest of your body becomes corrupt also. But if this organ, this morsel of flesh, your heart, is sound, then the rest of your body will be sound and good. That is a great encouragement in that narration for the believer to ensure that his heart is upon purity, his heart is upon goodness, upon sincerity, and does not have the different types of diseases within it that can cause corruption. So how do we ensure that our hearts are upon this righteousness, upon this rightness and goodness? How do we ensure that our hearts are pure and good? As Shaykh Abdullah Hafidhahullah mentioned, it occurs through having knowledge of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His actions, and thinking about His signs and His creation. All of that is from the means of rectifying your heart. In terms of the knowledge regarding the names and attributes of Allah, then that no doubt will bring about righteousness for the heart, And that is because knowledge of the names and attributes of Allah is the greatest form of knowledge. And that's because the nobility of knowledge is connected to the subject matter of that knowledge. The nobility of knowledge is connected to the subject matter of that knowledge. So the names and attributes of Allah, the subject there, the topic there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The names and attributes you are learning about your Lord, you are learning about your Creator. So that is the highest type of knowledge you could gain. And so it has the greatest of nobility. And so if a person gains that knowledge, learns the names and attributes of Allah, then that is certainly going to bring about or be a means for the rectification and the righteousness and purity of his heart. Salahul Qalb, certainly it will occur through knowledge of the names and attributes of Allah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in a hadith, Inna lillahi tis'atan wa tis'een asma, man ahsaha dakhala al-jannah. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 99 names. Whoever learns them, memorizes them, understands them, acts upon them, will enter paradise. That does not mean Allah only has 99 names, Allah has more than that. But the hadith says if you learn and memorize and implement and understand 99 of the names of Allah, then you will be entered into paradise. That again shows the nobility of the knowledge of the names and attributes of Allah. When a person knows that Allah, his Lord, is Ar-Rahman, the one who is oft forgiving and merciful, the one who is merciful to his creation, and Al-Ghafur, the one who is oft forgiving to his creation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Sami' Al-Alim, the all-hearing, the all-seeing. When a person knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim, the all-knowledgeable, when you know about the names and attributes of Allah, then that certainly increases the righteousness in your heart, increases the iman in your heart, increases the strength in your heart, your desire to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely for His sake. So no doubt one of the greatest means of rectifying your heart and gaining righteousness in your heart is learning about the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person who does not know anything about the names and attributes of Allah, then that person is upon a great level of ignorance regarding his Lord. He is not going to be like the one who has knowledge of the names and attributes of Allah. That's why Allah mentioned the people of knowledge are raised in rank. They know who their Lord is. They know the names of Allah, they know the attributes of Allah, they know Allah descends in the last third of the night, and so they use that opportunity for dua. They know about the affairs regarding their Lord, and so they are upon a greater degree of iman and righteousness in their hearts, compared to the one who does not know anything about his Lord, does not know in reality with any detail who he is praying to 5 times a day. So from the greatest of means of rectifying the heart is through learning knowledge of the names and attributes of Allah. Also, from the means of rectifying the heart and gaining righteousness of the heart is pondering over the creations of Allah and pondering over the signs of Allah. Everything around you in creation that you see, within that is a sign upon the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you see the great mountains and how they have been created as pegs in the ground keeping the earth stable, and you see the skies, how Allah has raised them and maintained them above us as a canopy without falling upon us, and how you see Allah has created this vast earth laid out so that we may live upon it, and how the rain it falls and the vegetation it grows, how that vegetation it grows. All of these things you see, and you realize the great signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The vegetation that grows, when you think about that. Even these places, they put cement and tarmac and everything, and after a year or two you see all the weeds still coming out. They're still growing everywhere. You put down all of the membrane, all of those things they give you to put in the garden to prevent it, and yet the growth, it occurs. The weeds, the vegetation, all of these greens, they begin growing. Any place that is left abandoned, after a while it's covered in greenery. This is from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of these things that we see in the creation around us. So that is from the means of rectifying the hearts. Also, يكون بتدبر القرآن العظيم. Also by pondering over the Quran. By pondering over, thinking about the meanings and what Allah has told us in the Quran. As Allah mentioned, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِي اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Do they not ponder over the Quran? Was it from someone other than Allah, they would have found much differing in it. But there is no differing or contradictions within the Quran, because it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah tells us, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Do they not ponder over the Quran? Do they not ponder over the Quran? Think about the ayat in the Quran. Think about the stories of the past that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrated to us regarding the prophets and messengers who came before us. Their stories are mentioned in the Quran, and the events that took place with them and their people, and the conflict that occurred between them. and the victory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to His prophets and messengers. All of those stories are mentioned in the Quran. And so pondering over those stories, pondering over the Quran, pondering over what Allah has told us about the descriptions of paradise and hell, the descriptions of the afterlife, the descriptions of what will happen in the barzakh, in the grave, the details of what happens to the disbeliever compared to the believer, how the believer has a door opened up into paradise, and so the beautiful smells of paradise, they come in, and his grave is expanded until he says, Ya Rabbi aqimis sa'ah, Oh my Lord, establish the hour, because he wants to take his place in paradise. And the disbeliever, his grave is squashed upon him until his ribs crack, and the door to hellfire is opened up, and the heat and the evil smells of hellfire, they come in, and he sees his place. So he says, Rabbi la tuqim as-sa'ah, my Lord, do not establish the hour. He does not wish to enter that. A person reads the Quran and sees the details given to us about the afterlife, about paradise, about hell. In the ahadith of the Sunnah, as is this one here, a person reads and sees all of those things, and that is from the means to rectifying the heart. A person, a believer, a talib al-ilm, who is heavily preoccupied with those affairs, heavily preoccupied with the Quran, heavily preoccupied with the Sunnah, with learning, with what Allah has said, with what the Messenger has said, then your mind becomes focused on that, and your mind revolves around that, to the extent that when you go to sleep and in your dreams, it is about knowledge and the affairs that you are dreaming of. Perhaps it is an event or some issue or some topic that you see in your dream discussing and dreaming of. That is for the one whose mind is focused and revolves around knowledge. Focused and revolves around knowledge. They say about Al-Imam al-Bukhari that during the night he used to get up multiple times. He used to wake up at night multiple times. Why? Multiple times he used to wake up at night and turn on his lantern. In the olden days, the candles and the lanterns that they had, multiple times, many times in the night he would kept waking up, turning on his lantern. Why? Because it mentions in his biography every time he went to sleep or he put his head down, he would remember something about knowledge, something about some hadith, or something about some ayah. So he would get up, turn the lantern on and write it down, so he doesn't forget. Then he put his head down again to sleep, and then something would come to him again. He would remember some hadith, some ayah, some point, something about a chain of narration. He would get up, turn on the lantern and write it down again. And this would happen multiple times during the night. That he would remember something and then he would get up and write it so he doesn't forget. That is a man whose mind was engrossed with knowledge, in knowledge. A mind that was focused on knowledge, focused on the Quran, focused on the Sunnah, to the extent he goes to sleep and all he's thinking about is that knowledge. Waking up multiple times thinking about that knowledge, thinking about some hadith. Compare that to the masakeen. The masakeen who have no connection to knowledge and their minds are only on the dunyawi worldly matters, or their minds are only upon the fitan that occur, or their minds are only upon the events of the dunya, or the events and occurrences between the people, and what happened here and what happened there, and what he said and what she said. Their minds are involved with all of this, the drama and the gossip of the worldly life. That is all they think about, and that is what their mind is upon when they sleep. Then what a miskeen state that is to be upon. A miskeen state, a poor state for a person to be on, that his mind, it is within the fold of the dunya, as opposed to his mind being within the fold of knowledge. And so the Shaykh says, one of the means of attaining a righteous heart is that you busy yourself with the knowledge. You focus on the Quran and the meanings of the Quran. And it cannot be emphasized enough with regards to the Quran. The basis of knowledge, it is in the Quran. All the ayat, the evidences are there. Everything we learn, this knowledge, this ilm, the basis is there. The Quran, the ayat, the speech of Allah. And the Sunnah, the authentic Sunnah. It cannot be stressed enough how much a student of knowledge must focus on the Quran. As Shaykh bin Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, he used to say that a student of knowledge needs to put aside 30 minutes minimum every day for the Quran. Half an hour minimum every day for the Quran. Imagine a person memorizes half an hour every day, and you do that every day, every month, every year. How much you will start memorizing from the Quran month by month, year by year, if you had a regular and consistent program of memorizing the Quran, a regular and consistent program of understanding the tafsir, the speech of Allah. Half an hour a day at least, the Shaykh said. And in reality, most people should probably put in more than even that to focus on the Quran and memorization of it and understanding of it. The basis of knowledge is there. A talib al-ilm is only going to be a weak talib al-ilm if you cannot have any understanding or do not have any understanding of the Quran. A talib al-ilm is only going to be weak if all you've memorized from the Quran is juz amma and that's it, or 2 or 3 juz and that's it. You are going to be a weak student. Imagine you've memorized 2 or 3 juz of the Quran, 27 or 25, or even if you've memorized a third, 10, 2/3 of the Quran, you don't know it yet. So what are you going to have in terms of being solid on that knowledge and grounded on that knowledge? And 2/3 and maybe 80% or maybe 90% of the Quran, you don't even know what's in there yet. You don't even know what's in there. You don't even know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in this chapter, in that chapter. Memorized only juz amma or 2 or 3 juz. So the student of knowledge who wishes to progress and be upon strength in understanding his religion, then the Quran is a key focus that cannot be neglected. And also, the Shaykh mentions from the means of rectifying the heart, or from the means of the righteousness of the heart, كثرة السجود وقيام الليل. Meaning that a person engages in praying a lot. Of course, the obligatory prayers of every day, but then on top of that, the sunan, the rawatib, the nawafil, the qiyamul layl, the supererogatory prayers, the night prayers, that a student of knowledge is constantly in the prostration to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, constantly lowering his head to the ground in submission to his Creator, his Lord, constantly making dua in that time, in the prostration, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, أقرب ما يكون العبد من ربه وهو ساجد. The closest a person is to his Lord is when he is in prostration. So praying plentifully and making plentiful prostrations to Allah, that is from the means of having a righteous heart. The one who ignores all of that, then as the scholars they mention, often the problems and the corruption in society, you see it from the people who are upon qillatud diyana. The people who have a very weak religiosity, they call it in English, I think. That they are weak in their implementation of the religion. Those who are weak in their implementation of the religion, they barely pray, barely manage their obligatory prayers, let alone anything else. Barely pick up the Quran to memorize or read anything, let alone Sunnah, Hadith, anything else. Barely involved in these affairs, barely involved in obedience and worship, barely scraping through. They have that weakness in their religion. Then they are the types of people who will have the free time to end up in corruption and drama and gossip and he said and she said and all types of affairs that distract a person away from seeking knowledge into useless affairs of no benefit whatsoever, affairs of corruption, affairs that corrupt your heart. Then the Shaykh, he says, and he mentions Qiyamul Layl, the night prayer. And if you look in the biographies of the scholars, you will see how they focused on the night prayer, how much focus they gave to the night prayer. And now, scholars, how much focus they give to the night prayer. It is almost like an impossibility that they miss it. For most people, it's very difficult that they actually do it. For the scholars and those who are upon that goodness and righteousness and guided by Allah, it is almost impossible that they miss it. That's the difference. For the average person who is not upon that focus, it is almost impossible that they get up and pray it, the night prayer. But for the scholars and their likes, it is almost impossible that they miss it. So the Shaykh mentions the importance of the night prayer. And then, وَيَتَجَنَّبُ مُفْسِدَاتِ الْقَلْبِ وَأَمْرَاضِهِ. That the person, a student of knowledge, has to abandon and avoid all of those things that cause corruption to your heart, and all of those things that bring about diseases to your heart. فإنها إن وجدت في القلب فإنه لا يستطيع حمل العلم. Because if corruption and diseases are found in your heart, then your heart will not be able to carry knowledge. If corruption is found within your heart, then your heart will not be able to carry knowledge. And even if you carry knowledge, then you will not comprehend it and understand it. If a person has corruption in his heart, then you will not bear the fruits, or you will not benefit from the fruits of knowledge, even if you carry some knowledge, because of the corruption causing that problem within you. As Allah mentioned, لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. They have hearts, regarding the hypocrites. They have hearts, but they do not comprehend anything via them. They do not understand and comprehend anything with those hearts. And the diseases of the hearts are two types: shahawat and shubuhat, the desires and doubts. Desires and doubts. As for the desires, كَحُبِّ الدُّنْيَا وَمَلَذَّاتِهَا, like the love of the world and the beauties of the world and the delights of the world. A person who is engrossed in the love of the world and the beauty and the delights of the world, then that type of individual will not have a pure heart to be able to comprehend and carry knowledge. وَالْإِنْشِغَالُ بِهَا, and the one who is preoccupied with those worldly matters. وَحُبِّ الصُّوَرِ الْمُحَرَّمَ وَسَمَاعِ الْمُحَرَّمَاتِ مِنَ الْأَصْوَاتِ, and the one who is involved in having a love of impermissible pictures or listening to impermissible voices, sounds, instruments, singing, and looking at the haram, involving himself in all of those types of matters from the worldly affairs, then that individual is not going to find righteousness in his heart. And also, the second type is the shubuhat. And the shubuhat are that a person, he ends up following corruption in beliefs, in innovations, and other association to intellectual and innovative notions contradictory to the methodology of the Salaf. And also the Shaykh mentions excessive sleep, excessive speech, excessive food. That these are all from the affairs that cause corruption within the heart of a person. The Shaykh mentions in addition his own commentary onto this section. He says, every person has a heart, but his level of iman and religiosity will be dependent on the level of the righteousness of his heart and the guidance and success from Allah. And righteousness of the heart is through iman and tawheed and truthfulness with Allah and piety, and with the affairs it will accept guidance and knowledge. And the stronger the iman, the stronger his memorization ability, the stronger his understanding, the stronger his comprehension, and the stronger his recollection of knowledge. And so from the means of attaining that is focus on the prayer, praying with sincerity, submissiveness, and complete focus is from the greatest of the means of achieving the righteousness in the heart. As Allah said in the Quran, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Successful indeed are the believers, those who offer their prayers with all solemnity and full submissiveness. And so if a believer is the opposite, is distant from the obedience to Allah, distant from his iman and following the sunnah, then the more his heart will end up upon corruption and a lack of rectification. And so also from the affairs that detract and take away the rectification of the heart are these diseases of the heart. One of the examples the Shaykh he mentions is envy. That a person may be afflicted by envy. He sees that his brother is keen and striving upon knowledge, and perhaps he's memorized the Quran and other affairs of knowledge, and so he begins to envy him. And this, the Shaykh says, is a disease. The disease of envy and spite. Envy and spite and self-amazement and arrogance. They are all diseases of the heart that divert away from knowledge. So a student must strive to avoid them. These are diseases of the heart that a person ends up in envy. As Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen said, sometimes a person, from the whisperings of the shaitan upon him, falls into such levels of envy upon someone that he begins following up on everything they are doing. Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen mentioned, a person maybe falls into the envy of someone to such a level, they start following up on everything he's doing in order to maybe find something about him, to maybe do something to him. They start following up on everything that person does out of envy. What is he doing now? What's he up to now? What is he doing there? What did he do here? Why did he go there? Following up on somebody, tracking him on everything out of envy against that person. That Allah has maybe blessed that person with something that you have not been blessed with, and so you fall into that evil envy of that individual, and that envy may end up leading you to cause corruption and to do dhulm and oppression to another out of your envy for him. So these are diseases of the heart, and one disease leads to another disease. A person falls into envy that leads him to then start backbiting another individual. It leads him to then start spreading namima, carrying tales, as Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen said, carrying tales from one person to another to cause corruption. He was saying this and he was saying that about you, to cause corruption between them. These diseases, they all pull along one with another. Envy and backbiting and namima, storytelling, carrying tales, gossip, and all of these affairs, they are not befitting of the student of knowledge. And it is not what the scholars have ever taught any student of knowledge. Rather, the scholars have given the tarbiyah that warns against these despicable characteristics. It is not from the way of the students of knowledge to be falling into those affairs. It is not from the way of the serious student of knowledge, the sincere student of knowledge, to be falling into this level of corruption of the heart against others and with gossip and envy and backbiting. These are diseases in society that cause corruption not only for the person himself, but for the community. They break up the community. That's why Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen said there are two diseases in society that break up the society: backbiting and storytelling. Backbiting, al-ghibah, and carrying tales and namima. He said these two are the diseases in society that cause corruption between people. So if you wish for a community that is built upon love and unity and sincerity, then you must avoid and abandon and distance yourself from these evil characteristics that the Messenger warned against. As Al-Imam Al-Dhahabi said, if somebody comes to you with namima, he comes to you with some gossip, then rebuke him. Rebuke him and say, I don't want to listen to your gossip. Rebuke that individual and do not sit with him listening to gossip and he said this and I heard this and about this and about that and about him and about her. The one who comes to you with this type of speech is only going to leave having caused corruption in your heart. And that's why Shaykh Al-Fawzan mentioned when he talked about namima, the example they mentioned that the nammam, the one who carries tales between people, يفسد في ساعة أكثر مما يفسد الساحر في سنة. That a nammam causes more corruption in an hour than a magician does in a year. And with all of the level of corruption a magician does, the nammam causes greater corruption in an hour to a magician in a year. And that is because the nammam who carries the tales and the gossip causes corruption between people and causes the unity to be broken between people and the brotherhood to be corrupted between people, causes the people to split from each other and to hate each other, causes that enmity between them. And so these affairs are all diseases of the heart that a student of knowledge needs to focus on carefully in making sure that he does not fall into them and that he follows the example of the Messenger and the example of the Salaf and the example of all of our scholars upon those noble characteristics, the characteristics of honor and dignity, behaving with respect and nobility as a student of knowledge should, not behaving like the children in a playground, speaking against each other and doing this and doing that, and behaving in behaviors that you would not think that a person claiming knowledge would ever behave in. So it is very important that we focus on these affairs. This is what the scholars say again and again, and you will hear it from a Shaykh Rabi' bin Hadi al-Madkhali hafidhahullah ta'ala again and again. You will hear it now from a Shaykh Abdullah al-Bukhari again and again. You hear this from the scholars, how often they mention it, because within the youth it is something which occurs quite often, and it is widespread because of the few who have that corruption and they spread it amongst the rest. So block them, stop them when they come with such speech and such behavior. And then the Shaykh, he says at the end, as for the hypocrites and the disbelievers, their hearts are sealed. They hear and see the truth, but it does not penetrate their hearts because they are upon corruption. So the fourth point here, the fourth chapter here, was regarding the Salahul Qalb, the rectification of the heart. And the final point there, the Shaykh mentioned one of the things you have to remember as well is to avoid corruption of the heart and to make sure your heart is upon righteousness, is to avoid three things he mentions here. Fudulun nawm, excessive sleep. It is not from the behavior of a student of knowledge to sleep 10 hours a day, to sleep 12 hours a day and get up at dhuhr time. That is not behavior of a student of knowledge. You sleep what you require, enough to give you energy, enough to give you the ability to worship your Lord and to get on with your day and your work. And you do not sleep excessively, especially nowadays in the winter, in the UK, Fajr, the middle of the day, 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, it is late now. It is not like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning like the summer. It is not befitting and suitable that anybody should be sleeping, or the men at least, that they should be sleeping after Fajr. That is considered an aib. It's considered a type of disgrace upon a man. You sleep after Fajr. A person who has no excuse, if a person is working night shifts or something, that's different. We're talking about the regular person who goes and does his things during the day, prays his Isha prayer, and then sleeps afterwards. You sleep 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight. Then after Fajr, these days in the winter, sleep again. That is a strange thing. It's a strange thing for a man to go to sleep after Fajr again. A woman could say she has an excuse. She does not have to do the same types of chores and responsibilities as a man, having to get up and go to work and other things. But even then, the women, men and the women, it is not a suitable thing in the winter times here now in the UK to be sleeping after Fajr. It's a strange thing. Amongst the Arabs, it is not known to sleep after Fajr. Amongst the Salaf, it was not known to sleep after Fajr. There is no such thing known to the Salaf, sleeping after Fajr. After Fajr, you begin, after Fajr, before Fajr. They would begin before Fajr, the night prayer and then the Fajr prayer, and you're awake. And then they would sleep at the Qaylula time, just before Dhuhr. Get a small nap just before Dhuhr, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it might be. And then you've had your rest and you're energetic again for the rest of the day. But sleeping at Fajr time, after Fajr, that is the time of barakah. As the scholars, they all mention, the time of barakah. And now you have an opportunity to take that barakah. In the summer, yes, there is an excuse, Fajr, 3 o'clock in the morning. The possibility then is limited, and then you may require more sleep. But now the opportunity is there in the winter for the serious student of knowledge to begin his day at Fajr and continue upon that. So excessive sleep is something that takes away from the student of knowledge. Fudulul kalam. The second thing is excessive speech. And the Shaykh says, if a student is tried, this test and trial is put upon him, that he is a person of excessive speech, talks and talks and talks about this one, about that one, about everything and anything, continuously talking about affairs, then his heart will become corrupt and the disease will come upon his heart. The one who talks excessively, meaning in useless affairs or even in haram affairs, as we mentioned before, the gossip, the backbiting, the envy. And thirdly, fudul al-ta'am, excessive food. That a student of knowledge who eats excessively, then that will bring about laziness upon his body. The Salaf and the scholars of the past, they would fast outside of Ramadan. They would fast a lot. One of the reasons, with all of the other rewards and everything obviously, but one of the extra reasons why they would fast a lot was because when they used to fast, they mentioned that they had greater levels of sharpness and energy. You're not thinking about your food and food here, food there, lunch, dinner. You're fasting, doing this act of worship for Allah. They used to say, it brings about greater sharpness in their mind, greater sharpness in their body. Whereas eating heavily and excessively only makes you lethargic and heavy and slow and slows your mind. So that is also something the student of knowledge should be aware of. That brings us to the end of the fourth point. Next week, inshallah ta'ala, we'll begin the fifth point. And the fifth point will be regarding intelligence. That a student of knowledge needs to be intelligent. And we'll talk about that intelligence, the different types of intelligence, some types of intelligence that do not benefit you, intelligence that does benefit you. We'll talk about the topic of intelligence next week, inshaAllah ta'ala. So that is where we'll conclude that chapter for today then. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.